Awesome. Hello, hello. Welcome everyone to the Mango Publishing Heart Wisdom panel. I'm Sherry Reichert-Ballou, author of Say It Now, 33 Creative Ways to Say I Love You to the most important people in your life. And today we are talking about Black joy. And we've got three wonderful authors here. We have MJ, let's see, MJ Fievre.
Yes, perfect.
Welcome back, MJ. I know you've been here before. It's good to see you again. And Jasmine Respess. Hello, Jasmine. And hi, Calvin. Calvin Davis has been here before also. Good to see you back.
Thank you.
Yay. Thank you all for being here. And I think we're going to just have a great time today. What I'm going to do first is I'll have each of you just give a short introduction and tell us about yourself and your writing. And then we'll go a little bit deeper into the topic. MJ, why don't you start us off?
Sure, absolutely. My name is MJ Fievre. I'm originally from Port-au-Prince, Haiti. I've made South Florida my home for 21 years now. I'm a writer, I'm an educator, I'm an editor, and I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Tell us about your book titles.
I've published in fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. My latest book is a nonfiction book. It's titled Empowered Black Girl. It's part of the Badass Black Girl book series. And I'm also very excited about your work from Home Life, which I co-wrote with Becca Anderson, the best-selling author.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is so great. Do you happen to have anything to hold up or do you not? I know you're in the process of moving, so they may not be readily available.
Maybe later. Yeah. I'll try to find something around me.
That's okay. We'll also post some links so that people can have them. Thanks, MJ.
Awesome.
Thank you. Jasmine, hello, hello, welcome.
My name is Jasmine. What about me? I work at Mango Publishing and editing and marketing. I guess like my authorship is we do have a book called Views for Venus Flytrap coming out next spring, so that'll be cute. And I studied poetry and nonfiction, so I'm just working on my, right now, poetry about growing up in Florida, like growing up in the wilderness, because I feel like people don't often associate Black childhood with like living in the woods and doing all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of what I'm focusing on.
Oh, great. Can you say the name of your forthcoming book again?
V is for Venus Flytrap.
Okay, great. And that's coming out next spring. Oh, welcome, Jasmine. Glad to have you here. Mr. Calvin, hello, hello.
Hello, hello. So I'm Kelvin Davis, and I am a body positive gentleman that dances, models, educates, and writes books. And I wrote a book about etiquette, and it is about how to be a modern day gentleman with manner, style, and body confidence. And it's a really cool perspective of the young Black millennial of how to be a modern gentleman. So I do, but it's in the room. Do you want me to go grab it really quickly?
That's all right.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, we'd rather see your face right now.
Okay.
but we'll make sure that we share. In fact, I think I just saw that Victoria posted the links. So awesome. Welcome. Well, I know that Jasmine, you said you might have something to read. Did you have that?
Sorry, I was on mute. Yeah, I can do that if you'd like. Give me 1 second.
If you're able to turn up your volume at all, that would be great. It's just a little bit hard to hear you.
I'll just bring it closer. It's been acting up lately. Is this better?
Actually, that's a lot better. Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think it's just something wrong with it. But anyways, I guess I will read this poem that I wrote. When you're talking about, I guess we're going to be talking about Black joy. To me, that has to do with family and food and all that. So that's what this poem is about. It's called Pepper. We call things what they are. Pepper is not dark speck dust, ash after wildfire. Pepper is not subtle pop of spice, freckling flank. Pepper is not black afterthought, say when to stop. At our house, pepper lives, green, red, dried blood, brown, bubbling out of glass bottle tops the stove. Pepper courses through, pulse in every pot, our tongues know. Hot, deep, full. Pepper is born of land, roots, vine raised fruit flourishing in familiar hands. Pepper is undeclared, tenderly tucked in checked bags on transatlantic flights. We name things for where they come from.
Oh, thank you, Jasmine. Oh, it's wonderful. I really appreciate it because I know you kind of pulled that up at the last minute for us, but I love that. When did you start writing poetry?
I started writing poetry. I think I always wrote poetry, but I didn't know what it was. And an English teacher, as they do, told me that's what it was. And then I just started doing it, and I applied to get my MFA at the new school very last minute. And then I guess from then I was officially a poet, if you will.
I just have to say it's such a gift to actually get to hear a poet read. So thank you for doing that. It's a beautiful thing. I don't think we get enough of it, actually, just myself. Calvin, I'm just curious, did you bring anything that you wanted to read? No pressure if you didn't.
I didn't.
That's okay. That's all right. And MJ, I know you weren't quite sure. Did you?
I can share something. Yes, I grabbed the book actually. Here.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful cover. Yeah.
And since I'm sure that we're going to talk about the relationship that exists between Black joy and self-care and self-soothing, I'm going to read a poetry about that. It's from Happy Okay, a poem about that, sorry. It's from Happy Okay on page 212. It's called, I Will Remember to Self-Soothe. 1. Outside in the night, where birds lie huddled, slow-hearted, against one another, the trees are dark and shapeless, and little girls, they're afraid of everything. They don't know yet that the shadows trailing behind them are also a part of who they are. Come here, child. I'll comfort you like no one else can. 2. Outside in the night, where birds lie huddled, slow-hearted, against one another. The trees are dark and shapeless, and I'm afraid of everything. I don't yet know that the shadows trailing behind me are also a part of what I am. Come here, child. I'll comfort myself like no one else can. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. I mean, once again, I'm so glad you chose to read us a poem. And I see that you muted, but I want to ask you the same question. When did you start writing poetry?
Let me try to recall. I started with fiction first. And poetry in my childhood and my teenage years, it was on and off until I attended Florida International University, and I became more systematic in writing poetry because I had to. It was part of the requirements. And that's when I really developed a love for writing poetry. I've always read poetry, but I became more actively involved in that universe when I was in my mid-20s.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I really appreciate that you both brought something. Why don't we have you jump in and maybe just whatever top of mind about the topic of Black joy and how it relates to your own work.
Yeah, so Black joy to me is, growing up, I was always, taught to embrace joy, embrace happiness. But the older that I got, the more societal's views about Black men and societal's views about people of color in general altered that learning that I had whenever I was raised, right? So there was always this thing of, there was always this thing about Black masculinity that like you have to be tough, you have to not smile, you have to like be, so bravado, and to me, I mean, I was tough, but I was always happy. I was always joyful. I was always wanted to smile. I was always into art and fashion. So for me, for not having that part of masculinity and then having this societal standard of what masculinity should be was always very confusing for me. And the older that I got, the more I struggled with, should I show so much joy? Should I show so much happiness? Should I be more reserved? Should I like hide some of my happiness? And I struggled a lot with that, especially in my college days, because there were so many guys that were, getting more attention because they were badasses or they were like, the bad boy and this and that. And me being the good guy, I wouldn't get as much attention or I wouldn't get as much, love. I felt like. But now as a 33 3-year-old married father of two, being the good guy actually pays off. It actually pays off in raising children and being a decent husband, being a good father, being a good educator, and really inspiring other people to really be the best that they can actually be. So that's what Black joy is to me.
Oh, yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciated hearing, about some of those questions and struggles as you were growing up. And I can only imagine, like, you do bring, like, just when you first joined in, you just bring a smile and such a great sense of positivity. And I imagine for your children, what a huge gift. What a huge gift. Yeah. Yeah.
And I just wanted to throw in that Kelvin's Instagram feed and blog posts and things like that sort of exude Black joy, and the males and the male point of view, which I thought, I don't see that as often as I would like. So good job.
Thank you, Brenda.
On being you.
Thank you.
Brenda, before you hop off, I mean, I know you're not going, but before you mute, was that one of the things that you intentionally wanted to bring with his book?
Yes, definitely. Well, I mean, I, came across him on Instagram and I was like, what's going on here? This is really cool. And like, so I think I stalked him for a little bit and then I brought it to a Mango meeting and I'm like, whatever is going on here is really cool. And I did see that it was like advice and style and also some philosophy too. And I really liked the philosophy because I think underneath it all it is about being true to yourself.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thanks, Brenda. So, Jasmine, let's go back to you. And I loved what you had said before you read your poem about that I know you said family and food. Do you want to say a little bit more about just in general what the Black joy means to you?
Yeah, I think Black joy is something that I focused a lot on and trying to find people to publish or just things that I'm interested in. And I think for me, there's a privateness to it and there's a small momentsness to it. Like obviously there's nothing wrong with like the public displays of Black joy, especially as Black people. Our public displays of joy can be literally policed and demonized anyways, but to me, the moments that I hold more closely are ones around the table with my family or even by myself, like reading a book or something, or just little things that maybe wouldn't be the most interesting thing to see on a post or whatever like that, but they're moments between like me and my sister and just things like that to me is what Black joy is.
Oh, I really love what you said about that. Not necessarily things that you want to blast out, on social media, but places that you hold dear. And it sounds like just those quiet, wonderful, joyful moments around the table. We love that. MJ, how about you?
Well, for me, the very notion of joy is a very complex idea because I'm not naturally joyful. I think that part of being joyful is how you're predisposed to being joyful. There are those people, you're around them and you can feel that energy, and they were born this way. They've been laughing their entire life, just bringing light to everyone. And I'm not that type of person. I tend to um, prepare for the worst but expect the best to happen. But I'm always aware of how things can go wrong, and I'm always kind of looking at what could go wrong. So I'm not naturally joyful. But I do think that joy is also something that you have to learn to cultivate. So in my case, I make conscious efforts every day to be joyful. I practice mental hygiene where I have specific steps that I take every day to be joyous, to find happiness. And of course, the fact that I am Black makes it even more complicated because you grow up being keenly aware of the difficult past that we've had, the history of oppression, the trauma that is part of our history. And you part of me wishes that I could say, well, it's all in the past, but of course we are experiencing a lot of discrimination until today. So for me, it's about Black joy. It's about focusing on what is beautiful about life, without denying what has happened before, without ignoring the realities of our pain, of our collective pain, but deciding, you know what, I am going to focus on the simple things that make me happy. I am going to focus on what is beautiful. And I think that it's a big part of Black culture, this idea of embracing joy, this idea of Black joy. You can find it in the art. Black art has always been associated with resistance, not just resistance as in denouncing what is not right, but resistance as in showing, you know what, despite everything that we're going through, we're just going to enjoy being creative. We're just being to enjoy our Black bodies. And this is really a form of rebellion, because for so many years we did not have agency when it came to our bodies, what we could do with our physical beings, let alone what we were allowed to think, and what the messages that society was sending our way. And now we're saying, no, we're going to be creative, we're going to express ourselves, we're going to be our own people. And resistance is joy, and joy is resistance. So that's how I see Black joy.
Oof. Wow. So much great stuff in there, MJ. I particularly want to just see if either Jasmine or Calvin wants to respond, because I know when we were communicating a little bit before the panel, you talked about, not denying what's happened in the past, like Black joy, not separate from the healing that needs to happen. And you just brought that up again. And I think that's such an important point. I was just wondering if Calvin or Jasmine, if you wanted to jump in with that or anything else that MJ just said.
Yeah, I think that's a major part of it. Like there's popular definition of Black joy that talks about not denying the past. And I think it's beyond not denying it. It's kind of like you have to honor it or whatever. It's like a part of the joy, in my opinion. It doesn't mean, and even if you do, like there's moments in sadness in it too, and that's okay, because of course there is. So it's deep and rounded kind of thing. It just, to me, Black joy encompasses so much more than just what you would think of as joy in a regular sense, just in and of itself, I guess.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks. Calvin.
Can you hear me? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
Loud and clear.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Black joy is like this. It's a very perplexing thing, especially, I like agree with the sentiments of like, you have to cultivate your joy and you can't really share all of it, right? Because, it is policed publicly a lot. And I feel like, you know, whenever I was an art educator in middle school. I taught middle school for 6 years, and my biggest thing was I would see so much Black joy like in and out, but then I would see so much of their joy taken away from like other teachers or just by like the system of like discipline, because there was just such a lack of understanding about how middle school kids enjoy being happy, right? Like skipping down the hallway or like, talking loudly or, just doing things that a lot of, kids, especially a lot of, just like younger people in general do to exert their joy, they would get punished for it. And it would almost like derail their 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 joy. And you would see them change moods so abruptly for like getting reprimanded for skipping down the hallway because they got an A on their exam, right? So there was always like so for me as a teacher, especially teaching young Black males and young Black females, I always tried to embrace their joy and how they exuded it, whether it was movement, loud talking. I would always try to not reprimand them for being joyful, because that's often what happens a lot in the system of the public school system, is that you have these kids and then they'll get reprimanded for something as silly as skipping down the hallway, and it'll mess up their entire day. And I just don't think it's
Wow. Oh, I'm so glad you were there for them.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. Yeah. And it echoes in a way for me, your own story when you were talking about being, that college age and some of the conventions around joy and expressions of joy.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Calvin.
of course. Yeah.
Yeah. MJ, I want to go back to another thing that you said, which had to do with the connection between Black joy and resistance. And I was just wondering, was there some more you wanted to say about that?
Before I talk about that, I wanted to piggyback on what Kelvin said,
Yeah.
this idea of letting joy be expressed and how particularly important it is for Black kids. That made me think about growing up in Haiti and this idea that being somber is what you should aspire to, kind of being a serious person. And there's even a term when you're too joyous, they say that you're like a Vivi. It's a Creole word that means that you're laughing so much, it's almost as if you're dumb and that you're laughing uncontrollably. So whenever you're too happy, someone says, you know what, stop acting like a Vivi. And I think that it's a little sad that the message that so many kids receive is that they need to be proper, and proper is synonymous with not expressing your joy, keeping your joy at bay. I just wanted to mention that, Kelvin, that was really meaningful to me, what you said. And I was a middle school teacher for a long time too. And it is something that I've noticed, that so many times the kids are just being themselves and they're being repressed in the expression of self. Of course, there is the idea that we have to move on with the day and teach the curriculum, but at the same time, school should be more than just about the curriculum. It should be about being able to be yourself and express who you are and finding that joy, particularly for Black kids who have to grow up in a world that doesn't always like them, and it keeps giving them the message that they're not good enough and that they're too loud, they're too violent, they're too this and they're too that. There's definitely a lot that needs to be done at the educational level within the schools, because if we're going to change society, one of the most important steps is to change the way school is, the kind of messages that school it conveys, because it's a reflection of society. It's a mini society in itself.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thanks. Yeah. I love that you were both middle school teachers. Yeah. Yeah. Did you want to say anything more about the connection with resistance?
Um, when you asked the question, the first thing that came to mind was actually resisting the messages that we get in order to preserve our joy. So there is so much that is out there with social media and the news and everything else. There is so much about what is happening right now, or what has happened, that forces Black people to relieve the trauma. When you think about, for instance, how we watched some people getting killed on video, and those tapes are available, and the news is incessant. And although it is important to create awareness, those things exist and they help with changing the status quo, and just changing the way people see the treatment of Black people, not just in the US, but throughout the world. At some point, you need to take care of yourself and say, I don't need this today. I don't need to know what's going on in the world. I need some time on my own. I'm going to resist the news. I'm going to resist that overflow of information. I'm just going to walk away, do my thing, maybe use creativity as a way to escape or to create something that brings me joy. I'm just going to walk away. So that's the first thing that came to mind when you mentioned resistance.
Yeah, thank you. Jasmine or Calvin, you want to jump in there at all?
Resistance from, I think back to when, obviously, when I was, whenever I was a middle school art teacher, but I was also the head football coach there too. And I remember I was like the youngest coach. I was 29 at the time, and all of my other coaches were like in their 50s, 60s maybe. And they have been doing this for like, obviously decades. And here comes me, like this newer guy with like these innovative ideas of like how to exercise size and stuff. And I remember one day I wasn't at practice, and I came late, and they had them carrying bricks up and down this hill. And I just remember thinking to myself, like, okay, if one of these kids falls and busts their head on like a brick, I'm going to be held liable for all of this, right? So there was like this resistance in between me and like a lot of the coaches about how to be innovative, because they were so old school, and they would get upset whenever like the kids would mess up a play and laugh about it. But I wouldn't get upset because I know that's the way of processing their failure. Like they don't want to cry, like they don't want to scream, like they're just going to laugh it off and process their actual failure and figure out in the brain of how to get better, right? And I knew that because I taught them, and I had them in my classes, and I had like a personal relationship with them. But them being coaches from the outside, being older, and them having this, mindset of like, this is how Black men are supposed to act. They're not supposed to laugh. I mean, I honestly can say out of the 5 years that I coached there, I maybe only saw them smile once. And to me, that was very strange, because I was always laughing, always trying to make jokes, always trying to get them on board with certain stuff. And they were just always so serious and somber. Like, so there was always like this resistance with me being like this young, innovative coach, educator, and having them be like, no, this needs to be done this way. You're being too soft on them. I'm like, being soft. I do have to explain to them because they're in middle school.
Yeah.
You can't just be like, do this and yell at them and then expect them to perfect it on the first try. You have to explain to them why this is being done and how it needs to be executed in the right way.
Yeah.
You know, so I mean, I feel like there's a lot of resistance with Black joy whenever it comes to generations, more than I feel like cultures, I guess, because I feel like, you know, there's obviously different cultures of Black joy all over the US and all over this world. But I feel like it's more of a generational thing now in this day and age, where you have like the younger ones, you know, will embrace joy and want to be happy and this and that. And you'll have, you know, older, you know, Black people who, you know, suffered a lot more than we had, you know, and granted, a lot of their joy was probably taken away from them because of the experiences that they actually had. So they don't want us to obviously be the same testimony. So they're looking out for us in like a positive way. But in the same way, you know, we view it as them trying to take away our joy. But so it's kind of like a catch-22 thing, because I don't think they're trying to be mean or trying to be like resistant in any kind of way. They're just trying to, I guess, look out for like the best interests based off of their own testimony from, you know, their own ways of living, you know, especially here in the South. I mean, I don't know how it is, you know, up north and all that stuff, but especially here in the South, you'll have a lot of, you know, older Black people that will look out for the younger Black kids and tell them, you know, you don't need to go here, do this, be here and do that. And, you know, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Jasmine, I saw you unmuted, and then Brendan, I know you have a question. Did you?
The question can go first. That's fine.
Okay. Oh, Brenda, you're muted still.
About that. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't have a question so much as a comment. I was observing that I thought that Kamala Harris, now Madam Vice President Kamala Harris, was modeling Black joy, and like during the campaign, she was getting criticism for it. Like some people were saying like she's not a serious person, she shouldn't be running. But I feel like Kamala was just like, I'll show you. And I loved that about her. And that moment where I think it was like the Howard University marching drum corps, like performed like at the inauguration. I feel like that was such an apex of Black joy.
Yeah.
It was so cool.
Yeah.
I loved it.
I mean, yeah, that's kind of the point I was going to make. In terms of these things don't exist like completely without each other. For example, the electric slide is a major part of like all the protests that I attended in New York or St. Louis or whatever. So this, like, the joy exists in these spaces as well, in these spaces of turmoil, and it always does and it always has, which is interesting because that both colors tragic things with a light and like lighter things with a bit of darkness, which is I find pretty interesting. But then on the other point you were talking about being an educator for middle schoolers and that complication between like older generations, I agree with that. There's like something to be said about it has to do with older generations. Obviously there's racial implications, but for example, I tutored in this ballet company where I was just like the tutor for English, poetry, and all that. But they were there to study ballet in a program that was provided by Sarasota for free for like underprivileged kids. So it was all Hispanic and Black kids. And it's similar to me in the way that there's this formalized, which I don't know as much about football, but there's a very formalized way of learning ballet. So, and it's if you didn't grow up even as a kid, even as a middle schooler, if you didn't grow up in that world, you're not only learning like this formalized dance, it's like has to do a lot with like French, and like that culture is a major part of it. So like they would go, I did my thesis on this, my undergrad thesis, they would go about it in the way that they could go about it. So like maybe they would want to incorporate hip hop, maybe they would want to incorporate like Latin music or something. And to me, it always seemed, it wasn't as if they were not outright allowed to do that, but it was relegated to a lower rung, in my personal opinion, from what I could observe. And it kind of reminded me of what you were saying, Kelvin, because it's like, that was their way of going about it. The steps got done. The point wasn't even to become a prima ballerina. It was to like have this kind of experience. So it's like they still had the experience regardless. But I just thought it was an interesting thing to watch, because it wasn't as if the elders that worked there didn't want them to benefit. It was just they wanted it to go in this formalized way. They wanted it to go because that's what they had learned and that's what they knew how to implement. And I was the youngest teacher, and they would always be like, well, they like you more than me. Which now, even still, like I'm 27 now, I was only like 22 then. Like if there was a 22-year-old, they would like that person more than me. That's just the vibes. That's just how it goes. But it was just like, yeah, because I let them like do what they want to do and come to things in the way they want to come to it. Because I can imagine if you're coming from a community where you've never really been exposed to that like world, you would come at it the way that you had the tools to come at it. So versus little girls who grew up doing ballet who like learn the French terms and all that from the jump, it's just a different situation.
Yeah. And I love how you said like about the electric slide and about how like there's always joy in the midst of turmoil. Because I think back to when my grandmother, she was born and raised in Blair, South Carolina, which is like a very, very rural part of it. And she picked cotton at like a very, very young age and was an unpaid servant, because, they didn't call them slaves then because slavery was abolished, but she was an unpaid servant, you know what I'm saying? So she was basically a slave. And I remember her telling me that like they would like sing these hymns and like they would sing these songs to bring them joy as they were doing this very intensive, working in the fields type of work, going all day with like a minimum amount of water and food and doing all these things. She would like tell me that like they would sing these hymns to really bring their spirits up and bring them joy. So I love how you said like the electric slide during all the protests and all of that. We always find as people of color to find some kind of joy in like a sense of turmoil or like the worst situation. And I feel like that dates back to our roots, to our ancestors, like back in slavery where they used to sing and they used to do things that lift their spirits up and spiritual hymns and all that stuff. It's very important. I feel like Black joy, if somebody could like do a study on Black joy and how it's changed from like slavery all the way till now, it would be like a really cool, documentary to see how it was and how it is now. Even with rap, even with hip hop now, whenever you think about it in the 80s, it was like a very Run DMC happy, kind of like get up and get off your feet, type of thing. And then in the 90s, it was more about like gangster rap and being a thug and really having a very somber, serious type thing. And now I feel like we're getting back to a way of where it was in the 80s, where you have a lot of these young artists that like are embracing joy, embracing humans, and embracing people really being themselves and being loud and wearing fingernail polish, like all these cool things that like you don't see a lot of Black men do. And now you see rappers wearing like pink fingernail polish and dyeing their hair and wearing all kind of cool clothing, and that like really accentuates to like the younger generation that you can be outside of this bubble and like you can like anime and like all these cool things and you could still be Black. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's also what in terms of like, it's not exactly making good things out of bad, but it just reminds me of food, which I don't know why I'm always thinking about food, but it's like the best food for people of color is like things that were left over from the jump. Like they weren't meant to be popping, but now it's the best part, you know what I mean? So I think it's kind of all those like making things work, but even beyond making things work, taking like things that aren't even great and making them better. I think like Black joy is to a certain degree.
I agree. And this makes me think about, again, growing up in Haiti, because having been in Haiti and being here, I'm able to compare and see, oh, how do Haitians act in comparison to Black people were right here in the US? And I see so many commonalities, and I totally agree that it has to do with our ancestors. Um, you mentioned the food, Jasmine, you mentioned the music. I remember after the earthquake in Haiti, one word that kept coming up in the news was resilience, because they couldn't find people who were um, living in desperation. There was the initial shock after the earthquake, but afterwards, everybody was mobilized. But there was also this attempt at holding on to what joy is. The fact that even in tragedy, you can still find release in joy. So at night, people would sing, people would dance, and whether they were dancing for those who were still alive or dancing for those who were dead, there is this deep understanding that comes from our ancestors that joy is a big part of life, just like death and sadness. They are also part of life, and you're not supposed to deny one or the other. So instead of resilience, I see a lot of joy in the Caribbean, for instance, where even when a tragedy strikes, you'll find people gathering and telling stories and trying to find humor in almost everything. And I think that this didn't come from the French colonizers or the Spanish colonizers. It came from those people that got kidnapped in Africa and brought to the island, because I see it in the Caribbean. I see it among the African Americans here in the US, this idea that there is always joy to be found somewhere, whether it's in the food, in the dance, in the music, in just enjoying our Blackness, our togetherness, our communities. There is this acknowledgement that joy exists no matter what.
Mm. Linda, did you have something you wanted to ask or say? I saw your hand up.
Yeah, I wanted to, it's sort of a question. You made me think about the protests from last summer, and I attended them or participated in them here in the town that I live in. And most of them were led by Black youth. And I remember particularly one at the end where we all ended up together in this square downtown, and there was such exuberance, so much joy. And they were dancing and singing, and half an hour earlier they had been fierce. And I'm wondering about that balance between joy and fierceness, and if the joy really helps support that ability to be fierce when faced with so much challenge.
That's a good question. I went to the protest here in South Carolina, and it was called the Million Man March, and it was about 5,000 Black guys. We all dressed up, and it was hot. Like, we dressed up in suits and with masks on and everything, and we walked about 3 miles to the state house to go protest. And I remember during the time of us like walking, like we were obviously like chanting some serious things, and then after that, like there would be a moment of like joy where like we would dance or like swag surf or like do anything to like get our spirits up to keep on walking because it was hot. And it is about finding that like balance, because if you're too serious, you don't want to get caught up in too much negative emotion, because you don't want to become violent and you don't want to become resentful of anybody. You want to have a purpose to why you have this negative energy. So there's always a good balance to have the positive and the negative energy, because you don't want it to overweigh to a point where you ultimately black out of anger and do something that could get you hurt, killed, or get everybody else injured. But then there's this thing about the media that portrays Black joy as being you know, a criminalized activity. Like you'll see people in Seattle and New York and stuff dancing during a protest, and then after that they get tear gas and they get, you know, hit with all kind of things. But and it draws me back to when I was younger, when I had a friend, we went to a park, and it was a younger Indian friend of mine. He was probably like about 4 years younger than me. I was about 13 at the time, and he was about 9. And we went to a park, and there was like a group of Black kids that were there laughing and having fun. And he was like, "Oh, like we need to go because like they're going to be trouble." I was like, "Wow, they're just like laughing, having fun." He's like, "No, I can tell they're gonna be." I'm like, "Dude, like," and I feel like the media in general takes, whenever there's a group of Black people, and if they're having fun, they're laughing. I mean, it's the same thing with like cops, right? Like if they're driving around and they see a bunch of Black people, they automatically think that there's some kind of criminal activity going on, right? But it's like if the same group were like a bunch of white kids that were at the park, you know, laughing and having fun, would it be the same circumstance? And that's where you have like all these random acts of violence, of killings, of like Tamir Rice and like George Floyd and all these other people that are just enjoying basic things that people do every single day. And if they were white, there would be no crime. But when is like carrying a pink water gun a crime? When is, you know, paying with like quote unquote paying with a counterfeit bill that he didn't even know that was counterfeit, an actual crime? Because I've seen people pay with counterfeit bills that were white, and the only thing that happened to them was they gave them their money back. You know, and nobody called the cops and was like, "Yo, this dude paid with a $20 counterfeit bill. Come and get him." You know what I'm saying? Like somebody lost their life over that. You know, so like we have to think about all the things that sometimes the media sometimes try to portray Black joy as sometimes being like this criminal activity, and it's not. Sorry, I mean, that was deep. I just had to say it.
No, thank you, Kevin. Thank you. That was a great response. Yeah. I was just leaving a little space too to see if Jasmine or MJ wanted to also jump in.
Rachel has a question, yeah.
Yeah, Rachel, come on. What do you got?
Well, I actually find what you just said so interesting because I took a course in college for media and society. And one of the things that they showed us and that was talked about a lot is, you know, those two different perspectives that the media will show us based on how they want us to look at a situation. And one of the examples was in a hurricane, I think it was in Texas, a Texas hurricane. There was a Black man carrying groceries above his head, and they taglined it looting.
See?
And then they had a white couple with groceries over the head, and they taglined it surviving.
Yeah.
And so it was a really eye-opening, that whole course was so eye-opening to me. And it really made me stop investing my time in the drama, because it's skewed however they want it. And yeah, it really opened my eyes. And, you know, at the time, you know, I went to school in St. Pete, Florida, which is very diverse. So I got a great education. So I got to see where my ignorances were, which was great because it made me so much more aware of what was real, you know, and I, you know, I'm so grateful for that education because luckily I was in school. I hate saying that, but during one of the riots in Philadelphia, and in a diverse classroom, I got to see the whole spectrum of perspectives through it from all different cultures. And so it was so eye-opening, and it just woke me up. And you know, it's that got so many of the perspectives I have today. So it's just amazing. Like what you were saying, just how they skew and turn things, and just to be careful of how we take in information. You know, we don't have to hate anybody the media tells us to hate. We have to look deeper. So
Of course. Yeah, you're right. I mean,
Um,
even here, whenever the Confederate flag was being taken down off the state house a couple of years ago, or maybe it wasn't a couple, it was like about maybe 60 years ago. But like the media, the national media kept showing these images of stuff that didn't even happen. Like we were so like there was nobody. I mean, there were obviously people that were against the Confederate flag being taken down, but for the majority of South Carolina, we were all very happy about it, and nobody was really like fighting about it really at all. So like they were showing images of like other things that were happening in like other states, in like other part of the like of the state, and we were like, that's not even South Carolina, like that's not even Columbia, that's not even our state house. Like I don't even understand why they're showing this, but for somebody that lives in Virginia that's like never been to South Carolina watches that and be like, look at them in South Carolina rioting and doing all this crazy stuff over a flag. But in actuality, like people were literally getting pizza and like getting burgers and eating on the street. Like everybody was very excited that it was getting taken down, you know?
Yeah. MJ, did you have something you were going to say?
Yes, I was going to say that the reason why I was in such deep silence after um, Kelvin spoke earlier has to do with something that Rachel said later. The fact that we're getting so many messages, and we're the media is forcing a lot of messages and images on us. And just when you think about the protest, for instance, and the riots, so Kelvin was talking about a few things that happened, some of the marches and some of the protests, and then he talked a little bit about those situations in which Black people find themselves, where they're being punished way more harshly than non-Black people would, and sometimes with death. And my mind just went there, and I started thinking about, all the victims of violence toward Black people, and just the unfairness of it all, and uh, every single piece of information that I've ever gotten from the media, it came rushing back, so that I was really far away from this room for a second. And it made me think about something. I think it was Jasmine that mentioned it, when we talked about how joy has to be really a decision you have sometimes to make a conscious effort to preserve the joy, because although we did inherit joy from our ancestors, we do have to cultivate it. And I'm thinking about all those situations where um, I almost lost my joy because when you live in a society that doesn't see you as totally capable, as totally lovable, as totally responsible, as totally just human, in so many places you start doubting yourself and questioning what's going on. I'm thinking about, for instance, how I was filling out an application the other day, and there was this one question when they asked me for my race. And it was not a mandatory question. It was just answer it if you want. And I had to think for a few minutes whether I even wanted to reveal that I was Black, because I'm like, what if the person who gets the application doesn't like Black people? And then I started thinking how sad it was that I had to think about things like that. Or how I was applying um, for a rental one day. And when my report came back, it said, "Oh, that you're among 15% of Americans that are on top because your finances, you've been so responsible, your finances are so good. And then we got rejected when we applied for the rental. And I couldn't help but think, is it because I'm Black? And at the end of the day, I will never know. But the question will always be there where you're wondering, is it because of that? Because so many times we get the message that because you're Black, you're problematic. Because you're Black, we're not going to take you seriously. Because you're Black, we cannot count on you. So that's where I went, in that rabbit hole of temporary sadness. And then I came back, found my joy again, and I'm back in the room.
MJ, thank you. Thanks for sharing that with us. And I can't help but think, and to all three of you really, that I'm so grateful, you know, because it's not just like, oh, we're just going to talk about joy. Let's just talk about all the joy, you know, but that interweaving and coming in and out, and for you to share, you know, where you went, what happened for you, some of these things like about the rental. I just think it's so important. Oh, I love that. Nita just said, yeah, authentic. And New Day, I hope I'm saying your name correctly, said, I think joy is in the fabric of our makeup, what has kept us going throughout history. Yeah, and I love that. I love that the conversation has dipped in and out. And I wish we had more time. I can't believe how fast that it's gone. It's already the 2:30. And I just want to say thank you so much, Jasmine and Calvin and MJ. Thank you for making the time and being here. And Brenda, thank you so much, of course, for being the one to always bring us all together. And Victoria, thank you for stepping in with all sorts of new responsibilities today. Thank you so much. And to all of you who are here and participated, thank you. What a wonderful hour. And we will be back next week with a whole new topic. I hope you'll join us again. Thank you all so much. We'll have the replay for you too, if you want to share it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, thank you.
It was great. What a great hour. Thank you.
Thank you.